What we've learned from the audit, congressional hearings, and an inside source is that there was confusion, disorganization, and uncertainty about the law within the Cincinnati IRS office. One worker told me there were no politics motivating their actions, but many lawmakers think this is political, and they're trying to figure out who is to blame. The IRS office at 550 Main Street has been under the microscope for more than a year. Last spring, then Deputy Commissioner for Services and Enforcement Stephen Miller sent a team of IRS agents to Cincinnati to investigate claims workers were targeting conservative nonprofits. At the same time, Senator Rob Portman and others began questioning if the IRS was abusing its power.
So for 6 weeks, from March 23rd, when you sent your team down to Cincinnati to find out what was going on, to May 3rd, you didn't bother to ask for any kind of interim report or updates from the team that you tasked with investigating these serious allegations?
No, sir. I don't believe I did.
Miller testified that he became aware of what was going on in May of 2012, but never notified Congress. More insight to what happened in Cincinnati could come from this woman, Lois Lerner. Wednesday, Lerner declined to answer questions on Capitol Hill. But here's what we know. She joined the IRS in 2001. And became director of the Exempt Organizations Office in 2006. From Washington, D.C., she manages 900 employees, including the agents in question here in Cincinnati.
And the question becomes, is there somebody else beyond Cincinnati that's participating in the vetting of these questionnaires?
So who gave the Cincinnati unit its orders? Did the orders come from inside this building or from Washington, D.C.? Last week, Steve Miller says that it was the work of 2 rogue Cincinnati IRS workers. But the Inspector General's audit says that the workers here did make efforts to contact their higher-ups in Washington. The audit says Cincinnati's questions to Washington went unanswered for 13 months. The I-team obtained emails from June 2011 showing IRS employees asking for guidance on the criteria to be used to filter applications. This is the first time we have seen internal documents detailing the so-called BOLO list to single out conservative groups. Last week, the Congressional Oversight Committee requested interviews with 5 IRS employees, including at least 3 from Cincinnati. Congress continues to ask questions. Some are not satisfied with what they've heard.
If this committee is prevented by obstruction or by refusal to answer the questions that we need to get to the bottom of this, you will leave us no alternative but to ask for the appointment of a special prosecutor.
Thursday, Senator Portman told the I-team he would like to see a special prosecutor appointed to this case. The Justice Department began an investigation last week, but neither Portman nor Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell believe the Obama administration should be left to investigate itself.
I will not answer any questions or testify about the subject matter of this committee's meeting.
Bonnie Esrig says she was embarrassed and horrified after IRS Director Lois Lerner refused to answer questions on Capitol Hill.
I think that for the general public, the fact that she refused to speak does taint the organization because it looks like there's something to hide.
For 18 months between 2011 and 13, Esrig oversaw more than 100 agents within the Cincinnati IRS Determinations Unit. The unit is now under investigation after a group of agents singled out Tea Party groups applying for tax-exempt status.
And I don't believe that there was malice, but if there had been by 2 rogue agents, it would have been identified and corrected far, far earlier.
We wanted to better understand the inside of the Cincinnati IRS office. So for 45 minutes, Esrig sat down with us and helped us draw out an organizational chart, starting with Lois Lerner at the top in Washington and working its way down to Esrig's former boss here in Cincinnati, Cindy Thomas. Now, underneath Thomas, it's an absolute mess. And Esrig says even IRS workers would have a hard time explaining this hierarchy. That, she says, is part of the problem. Esrig says the Cincinnati office was chaotic, a place where jobs changed constantly and information struggled to flow up the chain of command. Internal emails from 2011 show IRS managers trying to work out the specifics for a list of criteria to flag incoming applications. Esrig believes managers were only trying to do good work and didn't realize at the time that what they were doing was wrong.
Because the workforce is so diverse, if somebody had been, hypothetically, doing something inappropriate, their coworkers would have picked up on it, their managers would have picked up on it. There are too many people with different views to let something like that pass.
Ezrick says investigators have made no attempt yet to interview her. However, we know that at least 4 Cincinnati IRS workers, 4 men and women, have been summoned to Capitol Hill to be interviewed by a congressional committee. The agents in the Cincinnati IRS office are not talking, but now former agents are starting to come forward to not only defend them, but to offer more insight into what exactly goes on inside 550 Main Street.
People may talk politics, but as to working the returns, people in the service, in the field, are concerned with one thing: the law.
Ronald Rand was an IRS agent in Cincinnati for 35 years. He says people don't understand what that world is like.
Some of the attorneys I dealt with, I knew which ones were big in the Republican Party, some of them big in the Democratic Party. It didn't make any difference. We're dealing with the tax code.
Rand doesn't believe politics motivated several Cincinnati men and women to single out conservative groups filing for tax-exempt status.
To the outside person, and I have to admit that the terms definitely seem like you are politically motivated.
The Treasury Inspector General found agents used keywords like Tea Party, Patriot, and 9/12 to set aside tax applications. This week, leaked interviews between Cincinnati workers and investigators revealed IRS officials in Washington offered guidance in the targeting of conservative groups.
Washington reviews stuff. That is their job.
I don't believe that there were rogue agents.
Bonnie Ezrick, another retired Cincinnati agent, worked in exempt organizations, the office at the center of the IRS scandal.
I think that there were some errors. I don't think that there was an intent to treat one group different than the others.
But plenty of lawmakers do think this is political. So far, there have been 5 congressional hearings, and at least 4 Cincinnati IRS workers have been interviewed by congressional investigators. Tanya, congressional investigators interviewed 4 Cincinnati IRS agents about their involvement in the targeting of Tea Party groups applying for tax breaks. Well, now a lawmaker on Capitol Hill is offering to release all of their transcribed questions and answers, hours and hours of interviews, to prove he says that the White House didn't know what was going on here in Cincinnati. Congressman Elijah Cummings says if Oversight Committee Chairman Darrell Issa does not release the interviews with Cincinnati IRS workers, then he will.
I will talk to the chairman again. I've written him and begged him to release the transcripts. I want them released. But if he doesn't, I'll release them by the end of the week.
Cummings already released portions of the interviews, including one with a Cincinnati IRS screening group manager who was only identified as being a conservative Republican. Question: do you have any reason to believe that anyone in the White House was involved in the decision to screen Tea Party cases? Answer: I have no reason to believe that. Question: are you aware of any political bias by employees in the Cincinnati office against conservative views? Answer: I'm not aware of that. Democratic staffers say none of the 4 other IRS employees interviewed stated they were aware of political bias or motivation playing any role in the development or screening of cases.
Based upon everything I've seen, the case is solved. And if it were me, I would wrap this case up and move on.
Carol, Senator Portman says that the IRS scandal hits particularly close to home, not only because he's from here, but because he sits on the Senate Finance Committee, which oversees the IRS. Well, this afternoon, in an interview with our sister station in Cleveland, our Scripps station in Cleveland, Portman once again brought up the possibility of bringing in a special prosecutor to investigate what happened.
My concern is that if the administration isn't forthcoming with these answers, that a special prosecutor will be necessary, because that's in a criminal probe. They can subpoena people, they can indict people, they can do things that we can't do in the U.S. Congress. I hope it's not necessary, but as I said from the start, based on the way the administration has responded so far, my fear is that that will be necessary. We have to get to the bottom of it.
Now, Portman voiced some of his frustrations. He says the Finance Committee submitted 41 questions to the IRS that senators wanted answered by last week. Portman says they're still waiting. House Republicans say former IRS manager Lois Lerner surrendered her rights last month. when she sat in front of a committee and said this.
I have not done anything wrong. I have not broken any laws. I have not violated any IRS rules or regulations.
Lawmakers believe by reading that statement, Lerner waived her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination.
You don't get to tell your side of the story and then not be subjected to cross-examination. That's not the way it works. She waived her right to Fifth Amendment privilege by issuing an opening statement. She ought to stand here and answer our questions.
Friday, Republicans made it official. The Committee on Oversight and Government Reform voted 22 to 17 to call Lerner back to Washington to answer questions.
All she had to do was sit there and say, I invoke the Fifth. End of case. We wouldn't be here today.
We cannot allow witnesses to testify under oath and then plead the Fifth to keep from being questioned or cross-examined. This would not be fair.
The committee's vote was certainly political, but what legal standing does it have? Well, we could see it argued in federal court if the committee holds Lerner in contempt. Clyde, Liz Hoffaker said that when she heard the blame was being laid on, quote, 2 rogue IRS agents here in Cincinnati, she felt like a nuclear bomb had gone off. She also told Congress that she felt the agents in Cincinnati had been thrown under the bus. In her opening statement, Hoffaker talked about her frustration dealing with IRS officials in Washington who were overseeing the application process for Tea Party groups applying for tax-exempt status. Hoffaker said she felt micromanaged by managers and grew frustrated at how long it was taking to approve applications. Ohio Congressman Jim Jordan asked her if she felt she was being set up to take the fall for this scandal.
Tell me how you felt when Lois Lerner, with the plan in question on May 10th, goes public and says this was inappropriate actions by lying people in Cincinnati.
Sir, like I said before, it was like a nuclear strike, and I still think
that's a term you used with
the earlier interviews.
With your interview with staff, a nuclear
Correct.
strike. And so you would agree with Cindy Thomas, one of your bosses in Cincinnati, who said people in Cincinnati felt like they were being thrown under the bus.
I'm not sure the context that was stated in, but literally that statement, I would agree with that.
Let me ask you.
Well, we do know the targeting did involve officials in Washington, and that's been confirmed. What Republicans continue to want to know is how far up the chain does the scandal go?